Greetings. I am Dr. Hassim Kimbui. I am an associate professor at the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in the College of Education within the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling. Today I want to speak with you all about my book entitled Reparations, the Africentric Pan-African Approach. Before I continue, however, I want to take a moment and thank all of you who have supported me and purchased my other book, Africentric Education, Public Schools versus Charter Schools. Hopefully, the information in that book pertaining to increasing student academic achievements and behaviors in positive ways was found useful. Moving on, let us now talk about reparations, the Africentric Pan-African approach. It is very important here that I am clear about the words that I'm using. Those words being reparations and Africentric Pan-Africanism. Reparation is the act of renewing, restoring, etc., or a state of being renewed or repaired. Reparation is also the act of making amends or giving satisfaction or compensation for a wrong, injury, etc. Accordingly, the word reparation implies a repair. Questions can be raised, therefore, as for a repair of what? What damages were done? How did the damages occur? Who should pay for the damages? What are we asking to repair us? Essentially, how do we fix our problems? These questions and others are raised in my book. There are two major divisions of reparation: material and psychological reparations for healing due and demanded for the historic enslavement of Africans in America and the historic colonization in Africa. The material reparations, for example, are being pursued in the legal and governmental arenas and gets most of the publicity. The National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America's efforts with material reparations must be completely supported. Granted, we must understand that our material reparations will take many, many years to achieve. However, we can achieve our psychological reparations today, now. The ability to do so now brings into focus Africentric Pan-Africanism. What is Africentric Pan-Africanism? Africentric Pan-Africanism as a concept comprises the self-defining concept and constructs Africa and center. A few scholars even have disparate definitions of the terms, such as Africentric, Afrocentric, and African-centered. Some even have confused these words with what some have labeled as the African, for example, worldview, A-F-R-I-K-A-N, worldview. Notice the spelling with the white South African Dutch K. This is the spelling used by white South Africans of racial apartheid. Afrikaans is mainly a language spoken in South Africa and Namibia. The language is related to West Germanic language of the Dutch, which originated in and around the 17th century. Afrikaans borrows from other languages such as Malay, Portuguese, and some other African languages. However, a majority of its vocabulary is ultimately Dutch. Earlier, this is why I stressed the importance that I must be clear about the words reparations and Africentric Pan-Africanism. Our success and failure of research matters in terms of how we define or operationalize our variables. Now, back to the meaning of Africentric Pan-Africanism. From where I left off, here the word pan means all, everything, involving all members of an African group. Africanism our beliefs, attitudes, styles, etc., that is referred to by the word that ends in the suffix ism. Altogether, Africentric Pan-Africanism means that all African concerns are based upon the culture and environments of the African continent, regardless of the locations of African heritage people. Further, Africentric Pan-Africanism encompasses the research and the analysis of African people everywhere throughout their societies in the world. Let me be clear. It is very important to understand that Africentric Pan-Africanism is not wholly centered on pure historic traditional African cultures and behavior. We take all of the positive and destroy the negatives of pure historic African culture. After all, when Africans practice historic African cultures in ancient Kemet, they allowed the Greeks, the Romans, and the Turks to destroy, control, and claim their civilizations. They also accepted and cooperated with white Jews, Christians, and Muslims to change them and to sell us to be enslaved in the Eastern and the Western world. These are the reasons that Africa, having the wealthiest resources on earth, are one of the most underdeveloped and poorest continents on the earth. Through the definitions of both reparations and Africentric Pan-Africanism, you have gained knowledge. However, the purpose of defining both reparations and Africentric Pan-Africanism is solely not about the consumption of knowledge. Hence, the purpose of my book, The Africentric Pan-African Approach to Reparations, is so that we go beyond becoming smarter and smarter with knowledge. Knowledge, for all its potential, remains knowledge, unless reasoned and processed functionally to best integrate, learn, and increase our behaviors in the Upete, or diaspora. Subsequently, my book allows us to see things grow in order to have that which we talk about. It is for those of us who talk of and want reparations. To that end, reparations is not about free healthcare, free college education, free anything, or redistribution of wealth, to name a few of the perceived remedies, such as, 2, Barack Obama being elected president of the United States of America in 2008. The ability to achieve reparations from the standpoint of the Africentric Pan-African approach to reparations is in relation to us, our race, that is, our ability to look back upon our own racial and cultural traditions and use the information to create and define our reality. This, in essence, further relates to intelligence, the ability to apply knowledge to manipulate one's environment. Granted, I opened my book, chapter 1, indicative of our intelligence, based upon the culture and environments of the African continent to enhance our behaviors. The concept of Sankofa is noted and reflects upon us looking back at our own racial and cultural traditions to learn from the past and maintaining your African culture. That is to say, Sankofa is going back and correcting your past behaviors to correct the future. This philosophical idea, of course, emanates from the African continent, from the Twi language of the Akan ethnic group of Ghana, which dates back to Nubia and Kemet before the Akan migration to the western part of the African continent. The philosophical idea of Sankofa leading to reparations has evolved today and what is known as Africentric Pan-Africanism. Let me explain. I've already defined Africentric Pan-Africanism. However, let me define Sankofa. Sankofa relates to our ability to learn, teach, and grow from our experiences. Symbolically, Sankofa embodies a bird looking behind itself with an egg in its mouth. The symbol references the importance of learning from the past and maintaining your African culture. Logically, as our needs grow, so do our ideas. Sankofa has evolved today and is known as Africentric Pan-Africanism. With its foundation in Sankofa, Africentric Pan-Africanism similarly relates to the study of Africans, past, present, and future, by which to provide lessons to guide their African behavior and culture. Africentric Pan-Africanism is for all people of African descent, that is, Africans in the Americas, the Caribbean, the African continent, and elsewhere. We draw from the sense for the concept of Sankofa and its evolution according to the needs of African people seeking to problem-solve reparations. The behavior guiding philosophy brings forth knowledge and understanding of the nature of African ancestral enslavement and the after effects. The philosophy of guidance leads to enhancing our racial behaviors. Hence, in connection to Africentric Pan-Africanism and reparations, we reflect on our nature, our culture. We consider the current usage of the word culture. We all have a culture to consider when assessing the relationships between individuals, their environments, and their behavior. Culture guides all aspects of human interactions. Therefore, we reflect on the meaning of culture in context to our racial and cultural traditions, which expresses our intelligence. More specifically, what I call as race behaviors of intelligence, to create and define reparations, to turn the idea of the approach to problem-solving reparations to reality encompasses a detailed, coherent, accurate story of what occurred for reparations. Again, much earlier in the video, I defined what reparations was. Recall, reparation implies a repair. Accordingly, the compensations for damages represents 470 years of slavery post-traumatic slave disorder. Please note the words slavery post-traumatic slave disorder. You may have come across of or heard the word post-traumatic slave syndrome. Post-traumatic slave syndrome is not the same as slavery post-traumatic slave disorder. The term that I use, which is slavery post-traumatic slave disorder, refers to the brainwashing. The brainwashing is the physical application and or psychological processes of control to have occurred purposefully to African individuals that is problematic to our African beliefs, values, attitudes, expressions, and behaviors. The misdeeds or the wrongdoing committed is matched to being trained in behaviors like being submissive to the white God Jesus, betraying each other, cutting trees down, breaking up the ground, planting cotton and tobacco, processing crops for sale, and accepting sexual immorality. The coercive influence to affect our African behavior and culture involved our African ancestors and their descendants today. What surfaces is the real-world damage known as slavery post-traumatic slave disorder, or slavery PTSD. No fair-minded person will deny the damage that manifests today. The agreement relates closely to the modern-day mass arrival of Africans to the Americas. The timetable of such circumstances is outlined and discussed in my book, which explore the early African American history between 1450 and the present day.